Hello and welcome to CIBER Focus, your source for international business information. My name is Tim Smith and you're watching our series on business and peace. Our guest today is Dr. Janamitra Devan. Dev was previously Vice President of the World Bank Group. Prior to the World Bank Group, his professional experiences include teaching economics at Middlebury College and spending more than 10 years at McKinsey Company. His geographic expertise stretches from China, Southeast Asia, and South Asia to Central Asia, the Middle East, and Turkey, and Africa. Dev obtained his PhD in Business Economics and International Business from Indiana University. He has authored several influential reports on competitiveness, the financial sector after crisis urbanization, and talent and leadership development. Today, Dev will share with us his professional experience and perspective in the public and private sectors. Dev, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Tim.
So Dev, you joined the World Bank Group in 2009, just after the financial crisis, which exploded and impacted the world on the global stage, of course. Could you share your thoughts with us about the role and the mission of the World Bank Group at that time?
Sure. I joined, as you said, right smack in the middle of the financial crisis in 2009. It was under the presidency of Bob Zoellick, who was the president of the bank at that time. And I was in charge of what was known as the Financial and Private Sector Development Network. It was a network of about 1,000 professionals spread around the world, but significantly in DC as well. And my task, as given to me, was to oversee the development of the private sector, one. But two, to also pay attention to the financial regulatory environment that that regulated business in the developing countries of the world. As you know, the World Bank is meant to be a development bank for developing countries, right? So the developed countries, don't need that help. So overall, I was responsible for ensuring delivery of advice, to governments, and also overseeing the portfolio of loans that were extended to member governments dealing with those issues in the financial sector and the private sector environments.
Mm-hmm. So what was that like? The entire world changed at that time, and now you were told to go into this new era. Was that both an opportunity and a threat facing the world's largest financial crisis for nearly a century?
Well, look, it was a terrific opportunity, and to me, it was a public calling of sorts. And we were right in the midst of a crisis, and I represented the World Bank in the newly formulated Financial Stability Board in Basel, Switzerland. And I remember the discussions that took place there, in real time, trying to contain the financial crisis, but more importantly, formulating new policies that would mitigate future crises. I mean, that was what we were most concerned about. So it was a tremendous opportunity, not only to be able to participate in those proceedings and discussions, but in helping in some small way to formulate that new policy that would from the perspective of the World Bank, minimize the impact of the financial crisis on developing countries, right? So that was my major role, right? Was to make sure that we didn't take our eyes off the ball, as it were, right, on the smaller countries, on the emerging markets of the world, right, that often took an unbridled hit, that people ignored.
Excellent, thank you. You were recently a member of the steering committee for the 2015 Business20 event in Turkey. What were some of the key investment recommendations that came out during that summit?
The B20, right, as you know, it comes under the umbrella of the G20, or the group of 20 countries, and the Business 20 was formulated by the G20 in order to get the viewpoints of the business communities spread in the G20 countries as well as beyond. Right, other countries were also invited to participate in helping the ministers of finance, ministers of trade, the heads of state of the G20 to formulate policies that were, that would be helpful to the business community in general. So that was the overall thrust of it, and so a number of the recommendations that were forthcoming out of that year's worth of deliberation centered on 5 or 6 different task forces that were formulated by the business community as being important, right? So, for example, and I won't go through all of them, but we dealt with policies that needed to be formulated that would be more helpful to small and medium-sized enterprises. The business community was also interested on policies that needed to be retweaked, rethought with regards to the huge possibilities in infrastructure finance around the world. And we spend something like $9 trillion a year, right, on infrastructure, but the demand for infrastructure financing is multiple times that. Right, and so a lot of it is not getting fulfilled. So the business community was basically suggesting different policies that the public sector within the G20 could think about and come together, right, to adopt, right, as new tools that would accelerate the pace of, of investments in infrastructure. We also looked at issues in trade. Right, ever since the financial crisis, we've been going through a period where there's been some tacit and some overt protectionism creeping in again, right? And the countries that were quote unquote culprits of these happened to be within the G20 as well. So there was a lot of lip service, that was being paid, to the importance of trade. And the business community, rallied around that particular issue to try to formulate new, nuanced views, right, about how we can protect the global trade environment and provide, businesses greater opportunities to participate in them.
Great, thank you. What role do you see international investment playing in the world's peace process, Dev?
Boy, that's a big question. I think in several areas, and you see that in today's world, there's been a spurt of investments by small and mid-sized companies, as well as the larger companies, to participate in a business environment in emerging markets, or more importantly, in conflict-affected states, right, or states that have just come out of conflict, and where the rules of the game have been unstructured, as it were, to put it lightly, and where in several of these countries the rules just don't exist, right, or don't exist in a fair way, right, that would be useful to businesses. And I think we've seen, or at least in my tenure in the World Bank, and even prior to that in McKinsey, I've seen a number of companies that have done good right? Or I've tried to do good, at least, right? In trying to get the informal economies or informal segments of the economies more involved,
Interesting.
right? I mean, a great example is the M-Pesa example in Kenya, where the use of telecommunications and mobile technology to get payments, done in a more systematic fashion. There's also, experiments and activities that companies like MasterCard, right, have employed in using biometric ID cards, right, that would enable more participation, right, by people who are excluded for a variety of reasons from the financial system. And in fact, interestingly, during my time, and I'm sure it's improved, the World Bank group put an estimate out that there were about 2 billion people, right, who do not even have a financial account, a savings account, right?
That's a staggering number.
That's a staggering number when you have 1/3 of the world's population excluded from the financial system, and by the way, a significant portion of that are women, right? Then you have a problem.
Indeed.
And I see a number of companies, doing more to plug that gap in an environment where government is yet not playing a significant role in providing, an equitable playing field, as it were. But then, I've also seen large companies, I think, begin to play much more important roles in, they may not use the word peace, right? Because businesses don't necessarily think in that way. But in creating sustainable business opportunities, and in that interest of creating sustainable business opportunities, they try to get in greater involvement with the local communities that they operate in. Not all of them do it properly or do it efficiently, but I can say this much: compare ourselves now to about 30 years ago, and I think we've come a long way, right, of getting more large companies, whether they're in the US, in Europe, in China, in Japan, and so on, to play a more sustainable role in ensuring that their businesses contribute, right, to the development of the economy and not just to the bottom line. I wish more would play that role, and I think there's room for that. But clearly, I think we are on a positive trajectory. You might get some people disagreeing with that, right? But I think on a relative basis, I think we're better off today than we were 30 years ago.
Excellent. Thank you, Dev, so much for coming in to join us
Not at
today.
all. I appreciate it.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us for this edition of CIBER Focus. If you have any comments or suggestions for future topics, please let us know at CIBER, that's CIBER, at indiana.edu.